So, oder? Oh, bin schon online. Pünktlich wie die Eisenbahn, zumindest wie die österreichische Eisenbahn ist es auch nicht pünktlich, weil da gibt es Überflutungen. Herzlich willkommen hier im Forum Packbox. Mein Name ist Johannes Bergmeier, bin Generalsekretär der WPO, der World Packaging Organization. Ich habe das Vergnügen, Sie heute durch diesen Tag zu geleiten, zu führen. Ich bin hier bis 18 Uhr, wird ein langer Tag, aber ein sehr spannender Tag. Und es freut mich riesig, dass wir jetzt schon bummvoll sind. Ja? Das ist echt toll, hier auf der Fachpack funktioniert das. Die Fachpack ist da, wo sich die Verpackungsbranche nicht nur Deutschland, nicht nur von Deutschland, Österreich, Schweiz, sondern mittlerweile von ganz Mitteleuropa, von ganz Europa, weltweit sogar trifft. Und darum bin ich froh und stolz, dass ich hier moderieren darf. Transition in Packaging ist heute wieder unser Thema. Es ist einiges los. Wir reden heute, wenn Sie sich das Programm anschauen, hauptsächlich um neue Regularien. Irgendwer hat schon gesagt, weil da muss man aufpassen in Zeiten wie diesen, ein regulatorischer Tsunami ist da gerade am Rollen, der auf uns zukommt. Wie wir den bewältigen könnten, vor allem hinsichtlich Ökologie, Sustainability, welche Themen es da gibt. Und wie wir damit umgehen können, wie der aktuelle Status ist, wie es in der Zukunft vielleicht ausschauen wird, die berühmte Glaskugel, das werden wir uns heute sehr detailliert anschauen. Und ich hoffe, Sie sind zumindest teilweise immer wieder dabei. Sie wissen, wir haben ein offenes Forum hier, kommen, gehen wie erlaubt. Aber Sie sollten schon ein bisschen aufpassen. Wir haben nach jedem Vortrag die Möglichkeit, da gibt es da, kann man gleich herzeigen, einen ganz spannenden Cube, sein Mikrofon, ja, mit dem wir dann unsere Fragen stellen und beantworten können. Wir haben den Experten, die Expertinnen also immer auch noch da, um ihre Fragen dann kurz zu beantworten. So, weil ich heute den ganzen Tag rede, machen wir es am Anfang gleich so, dass den ersten Vortrag wer anderer anmoderiert. Bitte begrüßen Sie bei mir auf der Bühne den Philipp Bittermann von Hütig Medien. Der hat nämlich auch mitgeholfen, den einen oder anderen Referenten hier zu organisieren und der wird uns den ersten Referenten jetzt gleich vorstellen. Herr Bittermann, bitte. Gut, dann. Das sind wir.
Ja,
Applaus, danke.
Vielen Dank und ja, herzlich willkommen hier auf der Fachpack. Herzlich willkommen zu unserer Diskussionsrunde, unseren Vorträgen. Mein Name ist Philipp Bittermann, Chefredakteur Neue Verpackung und wie gesagt, ich darf den ersten Vortrag des Tages anmoderieren. Es geht um die PPWR. Ja, beschlossen, aber nicht abgeschlossen. Ich denke, so kann man es ganz gut zusammenfassen, denn auch nach Verabschiedung der Packaging Waste Regulation sind zwar viele Dinge klar, manche Dinge aber noch nicht ganz. Stichwort, Transportverpackungen. Deswegen gibt es Verunsicherung und das ist nie gut. Und darum wollen wir heute für ein wenig, vielleicht auch viel Klarheit sorgen. Auf jeden Fall wird das von Dr. Alexander Skronimus, Geschäftsführer Plastics Europe Deutschland, gebracht werden. Er wird Sie darüber informieren zum aktuellsten Stand in Sachen PPWR. Er wird Ihnen sagen, worauf Sie sich heute schon verlassen können und vielleicht auch ein bisschen darüber reden, was vielleicht sich noch ändern könnte, wo vielleicht auch Änderungswünsche bestehen. Und da wir ein ambitioniertes Zeitfenster haben, würde ich gar nicht so viel mehr Worte verlieren. Und Alexander, wenn du möchtest, dann wäre die Bühne jetzt die deine.
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the Forum Packbox for the invitation from me today to talk about on the packaging transition and the key points of the PPWR. The draft of the PPWR contains 300 pages. I won't be able to run through all of them. However, I will try to cover most of those topics from the PPWR. They are referring to my background, mostly related to plastics. And I would like to start with the subject. What's actually the subject of the PPWR? And it is the PPWR establishes requirements for the entire life cycle of packaging. And the life cycle includes 1 minute, includes the environmental stability, labeling of packaging, harmonized labeling of packaging throughout the European Union, conditions and prerequisites to allow placing packet on the market, on the European market in the future, and also to allow and to guarantee the market functioning in the packaging sector, as well as extended producers' responsibility. And last but not least, it's also the transition to a climate-neutral circular economy. But that's not all of them, because the end of life is also part of the life cycle of packaging. And there are also provisions in the PPWR to regulate the end of life. And the end of life regulation in the PPWR follows the waste hierarchy, which is valid in the European Union. There are provisions and givings for the reduction of unnecessary packaging. There are provisions for reuse and or refill, which we will see later on. There are provisions for collection and treatment, including recycling. And last but not least, the goal of the PPWR is also to reduce all other forms of recovery, including the final disposal, meaning landfilling of plastic waste. As Philipp Bittermann told in the beginning, the PPWR is decided but not in force yet. And here you can see a timeline of the very complex political process, which went back to the year 2023. And I think a milestone in the legislative process was the agreement between the European Parliament and the European Council in early March, where they decided on the outcome of the trilogue negotiations. Then another milestone was the decision of the European Parliament on April 24. And meanwhile, there has been a legal review. The legal review means that the wording of the PPWR in the draft is assessed to full legal compliance with the law of the European Union. And to my knowledge, that review process is almost accomplished. So we have to only wait a little bit longer. However, then still the European Council and the European Parliament, they have to give a final vote on this revised PPWR. And then we expect that the adopted PPWR will be published in the official journal of the European Commission in November or December, late this year, early next year. And then 20 days after the publication in that official journal, the PPWR will enter into force. Then it will be legally enter into force. However, there's also a transition time included in the PPWR, so it will be effective then 18 months later. So the PPWR, we expect, will be finally effective sometime in 2026. So one major content of the PPWR is to guarantee the market functioning in the packaging sector. So the packaging shall only be placed on the market if it complies with the PPWR. That's regulated in Article 4. And there are mainly a couple of provisions which have to be fulfilled, which have to be complied with to be able to put packaging on the market in the future. And these provisions, the prerequisite to be able to put packaging on the market in the future, are regulated in the Articles 5 to 12. In the following, I won't be able to cover everything what's regulated in 5 to 12. However, I will have a focus on recyclability, minimum recycled content and plastic packaging, bio-based feedstock, and the reusability of packaging. And I will just start right away with recyclability, which is regulated in Article 6. And the mantra of Article 6 is that all packaging placed on the market must be recyclable, full stop. Now the question is, what does that mean? And there are certain provisions in a certain timeline which have to be complied with. And the first one is valid as of the year 2030. So beginning from the year 2030, packaging can only be placed on the market if it is designed for material recycling. So the recycled quality must be sufficient to substitute primary raw material. And again, the question, what does that actually mean? It means that the packaging manufacturers and operators have to follow design for recycling criteria. And those for recycling criteria will be regulated in a separate delegated act, which has to be published in the year 2028. So 2 years before the market participants have to comply with the design for recycling criteria, they will be regulated in a separate delegated act. Additionally, packaging placed on the market have to comply with recyclability grades, A, B, C. And that means, here are the grades, A, larger than 95% recyclability, B, 80%, and grade C, larger than 70% recyclability. So grade C will be the minimum standard to be able to put packaging on the market as of the year 2030. By the way, here's a slight mistake. Grade D should treat smaller than 70%. There are additional requirements as of the year 2035, and there the packaging waste has to be collected separately and sorted into specific waste streams and being recycled at scale. And meaning recycled at scale means that there will be a minimum annual quantity of recycling material at the whole EU level per packaging category, and that will be at least 30% for wood and 55% for all other materials, including plastics. So plastics on an EU level must be recycled at 55% to fulfill that recycled at scale criterion. Now there's a slight problem because at the one hand, that target is really high, it's really ambitious. On the other hand, at the moment, we don't know how that figure is even calculated, how you can combine all the figures of recyclability from all member states to combine it on the union level. So that's so far unknown and unsecurity. However, there will be an additional implementing act to shed some light, on the criterion on recyclable at scale. So that will be in detail figured out by a separate implementing act by the year 2030. Not ambitious enough, there is an additional requirement by 2038. By 2038, only packaging complying with the recyclability grades A and B will be allowed on the market. So that means recyclability above 80%. So next topic is minimum recycled content targets, and the PPWR contains a couple of minimum recycled content targets in Article 7, which are here spelled out in that table. They are valid for plastic packaging, so they are valid for plastic packaging, and they are the targets for the use of post-consumer recycled content in plastic packaging. And those figures are differentiated by packaging type and by the year. So they're reaching from 10% to 65%, for example, for single-use plastics, beverage bottles in the year 2040. And they have to be fulfilled by packaging type. Now, those are the packaging types. By packaging format, the formats are listed here. That's, for example, PP rigids or also flexible formats, and are related to the plant, to a single plant and per year. So not to a single piece of packaging, but to a whole production plant. Now the question is, how can those recycled content figures be calculated? And that is so far unclear. And there will be an additional implementing act until the year 2026, who will be spelling out the methodology for the calculation and verification of the percentage of recycled content. So a lot of secondary legislation is involved in the PPWR. Bio-based feedstock is not a part, or bio-based feedstock and plastic packaging is currently not contained in the PPWR, but it probably will be, because the European Union, the European Commission, is empowered to review the state of technological development of the environmental performance of bio-based feedstock for plastic packaging. And based on that assessment, which has to be accomplished by 3 years after entry into the force of the PPWR, then it will be assessed on a probable legislative proposal by the European Commission. And that legislative proposal can, not must, can contain, based on the assessment, provisions on sustainability requirements for using biomass in plastic packaging, targets to increase the use of bio-based feedstock, and probably the possibility to achieve the recycled content targets, as I just showed, by using bio-based plastic feedstock. So probably in the future it will be possible to fulfill the targets I just showed. I cannot find them again. Those targets can be probably fulfilled in the future by using bio-based content. There are certain exceptions from that's the next one. Not sufficient, not complex enough. There are additional prerequisites for fulfilling the recycled content targets, and that's depending on whether the post-consumer plastic waste is retrieved from installation within the European Union or from without the European Union. We have in the European Union certain sustainability criteria for recycling and later on also for collecting plastic waste, because the PPWR will have sustainability criteria how to collect packaging waste. However, if recycled content comes from states outside the European Union, then it's perfectly unclear whether those countries are following the European standard on sustainability for recycled content. And therefore, the European Commission included that so-called mirror clause that says that any recycled content or collected post-consumer waste coming from outside the European Union has to follow the same sustainability standards as they are applied within the Union. And that's the mirror. So the sustainability criteria are mirrored outside the European Union. That's why it's called mirror clause. And there will be, guess what, an additional secondary legislation which will lay down the principles how to assess that equivalence of sorted waste and recyclate coming from outside the European Union with the standards from the material within the European Union. I will now switch from recycled content to reuse of packaging, and there are also reuse targets included in the PPWR, and they are subdivided into different product groups. The first product group I would like to tackle is transport and sales packaging, and there are 2 targets for reuse packaging in that product category: 40% by 2030 and 70% by 2040. And the addressees of that targets are the operators, so the operators bringing transport packaging into the market. However, there is an additional goal for transport packaging, because transport packaging which is used for transport between the company sites of one single operator or the company sites of an operator and a linked company have to be completely reused. So in principle, a 100% target. And that targets apply to those formats which are enlisted here. So foldable plastic boxes, trays, and so on. But you can also see that, for example, wrappings are included. Wrappings means shrink films around pallets. And at the moment, we cannot imagine how such shrink films will be ever reusable. So for some reuse targets, there's not even a technical solution inside. And you see additionally that there are certain certain material-specific regulations here, plastic crates, plastic boxes, so that regulation is not material neutral. It excludes some material from the EU's targets. Next slide is that, well, there are also some exemptions from the reuse targets of the transport packaging. That's, for example, a customized format for large-scale machinery, or formats which used in contact with food and feed. And also cardbox is excluded, so that regulation is not material neutral. Luckily, the European Commission has recognized particularly that the wrappings cannot be reused, so the European Commission is empowered by the PPWR to adopt further exemptions from the reuse target later on by delegated acts. And the then Environmental Commissioner from last March has committed to use these powers to examine particularly the 100% reuse targets for the transport between companies. Now the slide jumped a little bit too fast, so I have to go back to cover also the other packaging formats. 1 minute, please. So actually the first product group I wanted to tackle with reusable packaging, so it jumped again, are alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages. So there is 10 and 40% by 2030 and 2040. And those targets have to be met by the distribute areas with relative large sale areas, larger than 100 square meters. The smaller distributors are exempted from that regulation. And there are certain exemptions for high perishable products, for example, milk and related products, and for most wines and spirit. So finally, at the moment, it's not very clear which product categories are falling under that alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverage group at all. And for that reason, the European Commission promised to publish guidelines by 24 months after entry into the force to clarify the product group falling under alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages and falling under these reuse targets. There's another group which is subject to reuse targets. That's group packaging. That's, for example, boxes, which is grouping some transport good or some selling good. And the targets are here 10% and 25% respectively. However, there is also an exemption for cardboard, so that regulation is also not material neutral. The final topic I would to tackle are bans, and those bans are summarized in Annex 5 of the PPWR. And if you look here at the top, there's a ban on the single-use plastic group packaging, meaning that in the future, such group packaging consisting of plastics will be banned, while the equivalent products consisting of cardboards will be still allowed. So now I would like to close my presentation with my last slide with some conclusions. From the point of view of the plastics manufacturers, the PPWR is not perfect. But anyhow, we support the PPWR in general because it is a milestone in the transition to a circular plastics economy in the packaging sector. So in our point of view, the advantages are overweighting the disadvantages. It is a clear signal to the industry that the demand for recycled plastic will increase, and that will stimulate investment, in our opinion. However, we have seen that there is a violation of the material neutrality, and we think a legal act should be material neutral unless there are very good reasons to breach with the material neutrality. So that's a perfectly disadvantage in our point of view. And we have to see the problem with the transport packaging, for example, with the wrapping. That wrapping is obliged to be reduced when we look at the current wording of the PPWR on the one hand, but on the other, there is no technical solution for reusability for the wrapping. So we think we have to have a very careful review of the targets, particularly for the transport packaging. And we have seen that the PPWR relies on a whole number of secondary legislative acts. And we think that the European Commission needs a very good project plan to implement that large number of secondary legislative acts, and that we now should have a focus on the secondary legislation to implement the regulation in a timely, practical, and realistic way. So that was my outlook on the PPWR. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mr. Cronimos. Thank you for your presentation, placing this here as a sign that we now have even some time for some questions. Don't be aware, for sure you can also give your questions in German, yeah, or in maybe any other language we understand. And spricht ja auch Deutsch, ja, der Vortrag war jetzt.
German, English and Netherlands. Netherlands kann auch.
Looking around, if anybody dares already to have a question, please give me a sign. From my side, you said last line, yeah, there will be a secondary legislation round now, yeah?
Yeah.
What is your feeling, or have you already information? What's about the new commission, yeah? When we saw the election process, yeah, there was more the discussion about, okay, maybe we had a little bit too much of these environmental Green Deal things. Now it's again to strengthen economy. Do you think that this legislation will happen? If yes, is it going now to another direction?
Yeah, the secondary legislation have to happen, because otherwise we don't know, for example, how to calculate the recycled content in plastics. We don't know to do what we do with the wrappings. If we have to reuse them, then it's actually a ban, because we cannot reuse them. So the secondary legislation is highly important, and there has to be a really good project plan of the European Commission to follow that empowerment for the secondary legislation, and that they will be adopted in time. Also, if you look at the design in the year 2030, this design for recycling criteria, that's a fundamental criterion. Otherwise, the operators won't be allowed to put packaging on the market. So if we don't know by 2 years from now, or by, until 28 at least, how those criteria for recycling would look like, we won't know how we have to sign packaging to be allowed to put it on the market in the year 2030. So that those secondary legislation is highly important.
Okay. Oh, can we have some microphone over there on the right-hand side? Thank you so much. So, and I hope that we understand the question.
Hello. I'm just asking, say you fail to comply with these regulations in 2030, what is the penalty, or what would...
You won't be allowed to put it on the market.
Simple as that?
Yeah.
Thank you for me, because I have a similar question on my list. Yeah? There's now a second round of legislation, but I think the third round is, who are the authorities then controlling, calculating all these things, or?
Yeah.
Because it's coming from DG Environment, so it must be some environmental agencies. They are controlling this. Do they have the manpower? Do they have the...
I'm not aware of that, so I'm not doing the HR in the commission. To my luckiness, actually, I don't know. But even think back on the criteria of recyclability at scale. There's 55% of plastics which has to be recycled on a union level. Even that, how would you calculate such a number? I don't know.
Yeah. On the plant base.
So a couple of uncertainties.
I think this will be the third step we have to see. And as we know, European Union, I'm quite sure it will be different from country to country. Yeah? And this will end up funny. Yeah?
Sorry. At the same time, like we're seeing with the EPR and plastic tax, there's a lot of data gathering. Will there be need to submit all this data to some authority?
Yes, there will be the need to submit data to authorities, to your controller, which is controlling your balances and so on. So there will be obligations to report.
Okay, thank you. There was a second question, just 2 rows behind.
Ja, einmal danke für den Vortrag. Ich habe eine Frage zu Recyclability at Scale, und zwar geht es mir um die vorgeschlagene Möglichkeit von Ihnen zum Nutzen von biobasierten Kunststoffen.
Ja.
Wenn ich das korrekt verstanden habe, dann ist das eine Möglichkeit, diese biobasierten Kunststoffe als recycelte Verpackung angerechnet zu bekommen.
Es kann eine möglich sein. Also die Kommission hat jetzt erstmal den Auftrag, in 3 Jahren, also 3 Jahre nach Inkrafttreten, das zu evaluieren. Und wenn sie zum Schluss kommt, ja, Bio-based wird in Packaging genutzt, in Plastic Packaging, dann kann es eine Möglichkeit sein, dass sie einen entsprechenden Legislativvorschlag vorbringt, der enthält, dass Bio-based auf die Rezyklateinsatzziele angerechnet werden können. Aber das ist eine Option in der Zukunft, die jetzt noch nicht gezogen werden kann.
Kurze Nachfrage, wenn es mir erlaubt ist. Abgesehen von den Schwierigkeiten überhaupt, die ganzen Raten zu überprüfen, Ihre Expertenmeinung vielleicht ganz kurz zur Möglichkeit, die Raten einzuhalten, ohne auf solche Optionen, wie eben angesprochen, zurückgreifen zu müssen?
Also Bio-based einzusetzen, also meines Erachtens ist es nicht verboten, aber Sie können es halt nirgends anrechnen.
Dankeschön.
Super, danke. Eine Frage noch hier vorne, erste Reihe.
Wissen Sie, was die Europäische Union dazu gesagt hat, wie oft man recyceln darf aufgrund der Migration?
Wie oft man recyceln?
Wie oft man quasi Plastik recyceln kann, bis es nicht mehr recycelt werden kann aufgrund der Migration, weil da ja auch noch das noch offen ist, ob es schlimm ist, es öfters als 10, 20 oder 30 Mal zu recyceln.
Sie mag dazu was gesagt haben, aber ich kann es jetzt nicht wiederholen.
Also es gibt keine feste Zahl, wie oft man Plastik recyceln darf zurzeit.
Aber Migration ist ja ein Thema bei Lebensmittelsicherheit. Da greifen dann die Vorgaben für die Lebensmittelsicherheit, also Rahmenverordnung 1935/2004, Kunststoffverordnung 10/2011 und die Kunststoffrecyclingverordnung 2016, glaube ich, oder so irgendwas, die müssen eingehalten werden. Ja? Und wenn die nach 3-mal Recyclingdurchlauf nicht mehr eingehalten werden, dann darf es im Lebensmittelkontakt nicht mehr verwendet werden, ist aber vielleicht noch gut für eine Parkbank oder...
Also für Rezyklateinsatz und Food Contact gibt es die zwei Verordnungen, 10/2011 und 2016/2012, also diese 2 Verordnungen regeln das. Aber ja, zu Ihrer Frage, ich kann es leider nicht beantworten.
Super, wunderbar.
Good.
Thank you very much. First round. Thank you for the information. This was the starting point for our long journey. As you have seen, there are many details in between that can be discussed. Thank you, Mr. Kronimus.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the questions.
Ist Gardino da?